Hello,
Okay,
and
perfect.
you're all very, very patient with me as the last speaker of this afternoon's session. So thank you so much, and thank you for those most interesting presentations. Um, so I want to talk to you about something that I think is a little bit different to what maybe you've heard so far. I am very interested in the idea of scientists working with citizens. And I'd like to propose to you the idea of science citizens as opposed to citizen scientists. I'm interested in this because I feel active citizenship is very important in Europe right now. Many of our countries have seen a worrying rise in populism that can be represented in our political leaders. It can be represented in how we view truth and expertise in our society. This is very important right now for chronic issues such as climate, but also more acute or immediate issues such as COVID-19. I think rarely has there been a time in Europe's recent history where the idea of citizens being scientifically aware has been more important. And I feel that universities play a critical role in this area, and indeed could play a more critical role in the future. Universities are, well, firstly, they're not just about scientists, which is great. I love the fact that I get to work with lots of different disciplines. I'm sure you do too. And I think that we have a duty in society to make people think and reflect on areas such as citizenship. That makes me think about things like ethics. It makes me think about the role of education in society. It makes me think about people's rights. It makes me think about the trust that we have in experts, in scientists, in social scientists, in those in the humanities, etc. And so I come back to the idea where I feel I can contribute. And that's the area of science citizens. I feel it's part of the broader remit of the university. I feel it's actually important right now in Europe from an existentialist point of view. So much of our funding in universities is now dependent on grants and bringing in non-European students. And we have to start questioning at what point, what are we about? What are we trying to do? What is our role in our societies? It has to be more than each of us growing our individual careers. It has to be something about the collective, the universality of where we work. I'm going to focus on two groups with respect to what I've just said. The first are the publics. And I use the plural there deliberately as opposed to just the singular. I never would think, and I've been taught for many years not to think, that there is an individual homogenous group of people who live outside of the university. There are not. There are various groups of people, and the way we interact with them all may differ. And then there are those within. For me, the heart of the university is our students. This week in UCD, we have welcomed in many new students. And whilst we're working with them virtually, it is lovely to be present with all of these bright new minds and thinking about where they'll all go in their lives. And I think that my role as a university lecturer and professor is to be somebody who can empower those people. So let me talk to you about some programs that I have developed, created over the last few years. And I'm going to cite the values that drove those programs as important to me. And I hope that you can see how they connect with the idea of active citizenry. So each of these might be termed as informal learning, you know, or outreach is another popular term that people would use for this area. Not one that I like to use because it implies a sort of a one direction to the activity. I like to think of it more as an engagement, indeed as a form of learning. Much of the work that I have done builds on this idea of the third space. So we're going beyond our formal university barriers out into the rest of the world and trying to meet people halfway, as opposed to just bringing people in to us all of the time, to think with people who live in our communities. So the first value that I have is that diverse teams in my outreach programs lead and have led to diverse outcomes. And you see on the screen an image from a program I ran a number of years ago in Dublin called the City of Physics. This was a month-long program that was designed to spark conversations about physics in our public spaces. Well, firstly, it was great fun as a physicist to do this. I involved many of my colleagues and critically my students. We had pieces of art around the city where we worked with artists who came in to talk to us physicists. We had advertisements on our metro train, such as this question, which I like asking students every autumn: Fermi problems. Hopefully sparking in people this idea of science as something that is wonderful in the original sense of that term, something that is creative, something that might spark conversation and cause you to think, cause you to question. So the impacts on me were, this was a whole new direction in my career. For my colleagues, they felt it was fun. They liked having this collective enterprise that was not based around grants or around deliverables as the normal routines of the universities go. And the last group I would say that it had impact upon was my undergraduate students. They were very keen to be involved. They would go into the city and talk to citizens about their identities and about themselves as physicists. And they felt empowered by that. And we've studied the effects. Some students would say, I'm finally doing physics as opposed to just listening to you talk about physics in college. So this idea of it being hands-on, which is something important to them. And for the public, we found from evaluations that they felt physics was accessible because it was being presented to them in a more aesthetic form than perhaps they are used to. I move on to my next program, and the value I associate with this program is that undergraduate students can be leaders. So learning from the impacts of my previous City of Physics program, I developed a collaboration with the National Concert Hall, where our symphony orchestra live. And we created a program that explores the overlaps between physics and music. I did that because I love music. I think if I were not a physicist, I'd like to be a musician. And so this was touching upon two passions of mine. I have always thought that many physicists share this sort of dual personality of enjoying music as well as science. And so I gathered together a group of very enthusiastic undergraduates, and together we created this program. And so what happens is primary or elementary school children play with ideas common to physics and to music, and they're led in the play by undergraduates. And this happens in the schools and in the National Concert Hall where the symphony live. And this program has run now for over 8 years, actually. And it's been wonderfully successful. We travel around the country to visit rural schools and indeed Irish-speaking schools. And we have modeled this using the community of practice framework. So instead of me designing a program and telling students what to do, we have a more democratic approach where the students work together, the undergraduates, to decide upon the values of the program. And accordingly, we develop as a community the practices of that program. And this allows a great degree of flexibility. It allows us to play upon the strengths of the students who are involved. And we've done research to figure out how impactful it has been, thanks to Marie Curie funding. And we found that it had huge impact on undergraduate science identities. It always shocks me and slightly worries me that most undergraduates, when you ask them, are you a scientist? They'll say no. Indeed, most postgraduates say no as well. I think they feel that being a scientist is something that they will be given at the end of their studies, as opposed to sort of practicing science whilst learning about it. I feel that it's a real pity. I feel undergraduates are scientists. They may not be, as experienced a scientist as a professor, but I don't think professor is the appropriate level to reach to call yourself a scientist. If it is, we're a very narrow and homogeneous group. So students use these informal experiences like Quavers to Quadratics, the science and music program, to develop identities. They said that they had a lot of agency in this space. They felt that they were heard and they were respected. And it gave them something to believe in, they said, something to work towards collectively. And I think these issues for me touch very nicely upon the idea of citizen science. My last example is based on the value that the way in which scientists work is perhaps more important, perhaps as important as the results that scientists come up with. This is very important to me right now, and I think it addresses these issues of populism. In a world where alternative facts are now very common, there is a scurry as to who to believe. And science has presented itself in many places as being all about the facts. And I think that worries me, because science is not just about facts. Science is about how we establish facts. Science is more than truth. Science is a far more sophisticated enterprise than that. I believe that the way in which we determine new knowledge is far more exciting and far more interesting than just saying we have come up with the following X, Y, Z. And so to respond to this, I created a podcast series called 101 The Ways We Learn, where undergraduate students each learned new things. And we use that learning experience to talk about the nature of learning itself as a perfect example of an interdisciplinary, complex process that requires expertise from lots of disciplines. And so I've very briefly presented to you 3 examples of a values-driven outreach program where there have been demonstrable impacts upon my undergraduate students, where they have developed a more sophisticated science identity, and where the people who they have interacted with in the publics say too that they have a better appreciation of science, perhaps a more science citizen disposition towards the world. And I go back to the very point I raised at the end to finish. I think this is what universities should and must be about if we are to adapt for the 21st century. I think that outreach programs can often be used just as a way to increase the numbers of students, or to give awareness to individual research programs that we are working on. And whilst they are not invalid, I think it's a very limited view of the potential of working with people beyond the confines, beyond the perimeters of our universities. I think it's what we should be about. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chano, I think we have about 20 minutes for this